Hey, scholars. Hey, let's talk about Chapter 7, which is process strategy. That's the third of the 10 OM decisions, the third one we will review. It starts on page 280 of your textbook, and let's start with the discussion on Harley-Davidson, which is the case in the starting of the chapter. And one of the things you'll notice is that when Harley looks at process strategy, what they've done in the pictorial diagram on page 280 is they've laid out all of the steps that are taken to go from the initial framing of the bike through to a completed and tested product with, I believe it says 28 different tests along the way. And that's really what you have to do with process strategy. It's really about understanding what your end product needs to look like and breaking the process into a series of components or steps required to get from whatever your particular raw material is through to the finished product. So of paramount importance in process strategy is just that. Take the process, break it down into bite-sized pieces so that you can manage it. I've seen people try to do a process without breaking it into components, and it really just doesn't work. In my business, in the LED business, we've broken our process down into about 30 different steps, and that's after the customer signs the contract through to when we get the completed certificate of acceptance from the customer. And the things that we have to do that. We use a program called Trello to track the process as the customer's installation is being done, and it's a very well organized and methodological process to move it along. Harley does the same thing, so you really have to do that in any kind of a process that you're managing when you're building motorcycles or installing LED lights. The chapter or page 282, there's a nice definition of process strategy here. I'm going to read it. It says the objective is to create a process that can produce offerings that meet customers' requirements within cost and other managerial constraints. And that's really our definition of quality also, isn't it? That the organization, if it wants to define quality, needs to define it in the customer's eyes. And we talked about that in the last chapter. So what are the customer's expectations? What are the costs that you have to produce this for? And are you meeting those expectations in producing your product? It talks about fixed and variable cost. You'll remember the income statement. Income statement had four basic components to it: revenue less cost of goods sold. Cost of goods sold was basically your variable cost in your business. Revenue minus cost of goods sold equals gross margin. Subtract from that your operating expenses, typically rents, salaries, utilities, things of that nature. And those are your fixed cost. And subtract your fixed cost, your operating expenses from your gross margin, and that gives you a net income in your business. So it's important to understand the difference between fixed cost and variable cost as you're doing analyses of a process and which one you would want to select. Some have higher fixed cost up front. It costs you more to produce to get a certain software package, for instance. But as one of the examples in the text shows, and then it costs you less to produce a report with that more expensive software package. It's more automated, for instance, so it takes less manual labor, but less variable cost. We'll talk about that here in a minute. The book goes in to talk about 4 different process strategies, and that's on page 283. The first they call process flow. That's a low volume and high variety type of a process. They use the Arnold Palmer Hospital as an example of that. And if you've got a low volume, high variety, you would use a process flow, which they've laid out pretty clearly in the book. The next is a repetitive focus, more manufacturing related. You wouldn't call my LED business more repetitive in terms of the focus, because there's quite a bit different with each one of the installations. If we're doing a nursing home or doing a car dealership, they're significantly different. There's certainly similarities, but there's a lot of differences in those. The next is product focus, which is high volume and low variety. The example that they gave there was Frito-Lay. And the next is mass customization. And that would probably be the better example of my LED business. Through software, through improvements in technology, a lot of business are going to more mass customization. So producing something that the customer wants the way the customer wants it. And being able to do that, Volvo, for instance, produces cars that are completely unique. Of course, there's a lot of similarities, but you can pick virtually anything you want down to the color of the seat, the type of steering wheel, wheels, and et cetera, et cetera. And their technology allows them to put all of that together and have your car produced for you just the way you want it. So mass customization. On page 286, it talks about something called a crossover chart. And basically what they're looking for in this chart, what they're describing is what I described earlier, that software package. It costs you X dollars to buy the software up front, and your variable cost per, in this case, accounting report changes based on how much the software costs. In this case, it goes from $200,000 software A upfront investment, but it costs you $60 to produce a report, down to the software C, which costs you $400,000, and then costs you $10 to produce a report. And so then you have to do some 8th grade algebra, which is shown over on page 287, to determine which one of those software packages would work best for your organization. So you should know that 8th grade algebra. It's pretty well laid out there. Hopefully you all know how to do it anyways. Break-even analysis is important. We've talked about that. The formula for break-even is fixed cost divided by 1 minus variable cost percentage. Again, that's your fixed cost, your rents, and in case of the software package, your purchase of your software package would be the fixed cost, divided by 1 minus your variable cost percentage. So if your variable costs are 20% of labor, then you would divide your fixed cost by 1 minus variable cost, 20% in this example, or 0.8, 80%, to get your break even on that particular investment. So you should know that. We talk about on the bottom of page 286, once again, how do we define quality in the organization? You look at differentiation, you look at responsiveness, and you look at the cost or the low cost of the product. And most of our decisions kind of fit on that spectrum someplace in terms of process control. It talks about a value streaming map on page 290. It's kind of an interesting approach to basically, how do you, in this case, it's assemble a hamburger. In one of the books I wrote, I gave an example of this in frying bacon. And how can you do that in a quicker and more efficient fashion? You can look at this chart. It's kind of interesting, but it's a simple way, if you will, to lay out a process and say, is there a better way to do this? And as any of you engineers know, that more efficient processes have less steps to produce the same outcome. So any steps that you could take out of the process would be steps that would make the process generally more efficient, depending, of course, on the complexity of those steps. Lots of other good stuff in the chapter, but I promise you I'll keep these under 10 minutes, so I will. On page 296, we talk about a lot of different things, vision systems. How do you track things? How do you control things in your production environment? Vision systems is one way to do it. You watch what's going on. One of my clients has 3 remote karate studios, and what he's done is he's put cameras up in the offices and in the on the karate floors. So at any point in time, he can call up that karate studio and see what's going on. Is the manager where the manager needs to be? Is the class going well? There's microphones also, so he can hear what's going on. And what do the managers think of that? They hate it. What does he think about it? He loves it. I love it too. I mean, it's a great way to control the process. And as far as process goes, really control is one of the key words that we want to look at. So that's it for chapter 7. Hope you've all read it. We'll spend a couple minutes in it on class on Tuesday, and got a couple more videos coming up.